never thought the day would come when my own daughter-in-law would raise her hand against me, but life has a strange way of showing you what you've refused to see for years. It all started on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of quiet day where the only sound in my house was the ticking of the clock and the wind brushing against the curtains. I was in the kitchen making tea when the front door burst open with a force that made me spill hot water on my hand. I turned, startled, and there she was, Melissa. Her face was red, her eyes blazing with fury, and in her hand she was holding her phone like it was a weapon. "Where are the keys?" she shouted before I could even greet her. "What keys?" I asked, still trying to process what was happening. "Don't play dumb with me, Margaret. The house keys. I want them now." I stared at her, utterly confused. "Melissa, this is my house. Why on earth would I give you my keys?" That was when it happened. She stepped closer, and before I could react, her hand struck my cheek so hard I stumbled backward, almost dropping the teacup I had been holding. The sound of that slap echoed in the silence that followed. For a moment, all I could do was touch my burning cheek and stare at her in disbelief. "You've gone mad," I whispered. "No," she snapped, her voice shaking with rage. "I've had enough of you interfering in my marriage. You think just because you helped with the down payment you can control our lives? You've been using that as an excuse to treat me like a tenant in my own home." My lips trembled. "Melissa, I don't control anything. I've done nothing but try to help you and Daniel." "Help?" she scoffed. "You call showing up uninvited, criticizing my cooking, rearranging my furniture, and telling me how to raise my daughter help?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Somewhere in her accusations there was a painful echo of truth. Maybe I had crossed boundaries without realizing it. Maybe I had tried too hard to stay involved after Daniel married. Still, nothing justified violence. "You don't get to hit me, Melissa," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I am your husband's mother, not your enemy." She took a deep breath, visibly struggling to calm herself, but her eyes still blazed. "Daniel will back me on this. You're giving me the keys today, and you're moving out of this house. We're done living under your shadow." "Daniel?" I repeated, stunned. "He would never—" "He already agreed," she interrupted. My heart sank. For a long moment, I couldn't find air to breathe. The house, the one I'd lived in for 40 years, suddenly felt foreign, like it no longer belonged to me. I felt the weight of decades pressing down on my chest. Memories of raising Daniel here, of my late husband fixing the leaky roof, of birthdays, of Christmas mornings filled with laughter. Was all that about to end with a slap? "Why don't you sit down?" I whispered. "We can talk about this calmly." But she shook her head furiously. "No more talking. You've had control long enough." She turned on her heel and stormed toward the front door. I followed her out of instinct, still dazed, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, his expression already tense, as if he had been dreading this confrontation. "What's going on?" he asked, looking from Melissa to me. "Ask your mother," Melissa spat. "She's refusing to hand over the house keys." Daniel looked at me, his jaw tight. "Mom, maybe we should sit down." "She slapped me," I said, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. He froze. "Melissa, tell me that's not true." She crossed her arms. "She pushed me first," she lied, without even blinking. My mouth fell open in shock. "That's not true," I cried, but I saw it. The hesitation in Daniel's eyes, the doubt flickering there. That was what hurt more than the slap. The fact that my own son, the boy I had raised, might actually believe her. "Mom," he said carefully, "maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while, just until things cool down." "Daniel, this is my home," I said, my voice breaking. "Your father and I built this life together. Every corner of this house holds a memory of you, and now you're asking me to leave because she—" I couldn't finish the sentence. My throat closed up with tears. "Please," Daniel said, lowering his voice. "I just need peace in my marriage." Peace. That word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I turned away from them both, unable to look at either of them. "Fine," I said finally, my voice shaking. "If peace means erasing your mother, then you'll have it." I went upstairs and closed the door behind me. My cheek still stung from the slap, but the pain inside me was far deeper. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the photo of Daniel as a little boy, the one where he was holding a toy airplane, smiling so wide his dimples showed. I had given everything for that child. Every ounce of love, every sleepless night, every sacrifice. And now, he stood by a woman who had just raised her hand against me. Outside my window, I could hear them arguing. Melissa's sharp voice, Daniel's weary tone. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. I was the problem, the obstacle, the unwanted presence in their perfect little life. I wiped my tears and took a deep breath. If this was how my story was going to change, then I would face it standing tall, not cowering in my own home. What I didn't know was that this confrontation would become the turning point of everything. Not just my relationship with my son and his wife, but with myself. Because sometimes it takes losing what you've built to discover who you truly are, and this was only the beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest until it's hard to breathe. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the sharp sound of the slap again and again like a cruel echo that refused to fade. Every corner of my home held ghosts of happier times. I could almost see Daniel as a boy, running down the hallway in his pajamas, clutching his blanket and giggling. I could hear my late husband, Richard, humming softly as he fixed the leaky faucet, his strong hands covered in grease. And now all of it felt tainted by the memory of Melissa's rage. The first rays of dawn slipped through the curtains, and I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't stay here if my presence only caused tension, but I also refused to leave in shame. I made myself a cup of tea, the same ritual I had performed every morning for 40 years. And as the kettle whistled, I whispered to myself, "This is still my home. I have every right to be here." But even as I said it, I felt uncertainty gnawing at me. At 8 o'clock sharp, Daniel came down the stairs. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders slumped. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "Mom," he began softly, "we need to talk." I set the cup down carefully. "I'm listening." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Melissa's upset. She thinks you've been undermining her since we moved in." I sighed. "Daniel, I know I've made mistakes. Maybe I've been too involved, but everything I did came from love." "I know," he said quickly, "but you also need to understand her side. She feels like she can't breathe here, like she's living in someone else's house." "Because she is," I replied quietly. "This is my house." "I didn't ask her to move in. I welcomed both of you when you said you needed a few months to save for your own place." He looked down, ashamed. "It was supposed to be temporary, but things got complicated. The rent prices went up, and with Ella's daycare costs—" He trailed off. I softened a little at the mention of my granddaughter. Sweet little Ella, with her brown curls and her father's eyes. She was the one bright spot in all this. "I understand, Daniel, but there are boundaries. Melissa crossed a line yesterday." His expression darkened. "I talked to her. She regrets it." "Regrets it?" I repeated, disbelief filling my voice. "Daniel, she hit me. That's not something you just regret over breakfast." He winced. "I know, Mom. I told her it was unacceptable, but she's under a lot of stress. Work, Ella. The bills. We're all under stress," I cut in sharply. "That doesn't excuse violence." He looked at me, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Maybe you could stay with Aunt Linda for a few days, just until Melissa cools down." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You're really asking me to leave?" "Just temporarily," he said, but his voice was pleading, not convincing. "I need time to fix this, Mom. Please." I turned away, blinking back tears. I had lived through losing my husband, through years of scraping by as a widow, through loneliness so deep it had almost swallowed me whole. But this, being pushed aside by my own child, was a pain unlike any other. I nodded slowly. "Fine, I'll go." He looked relieved, which broke my heart even more. I went upstairs, packed a small suitcase, and stopped at the doorway of my bedroom one last time. The morning light fell across the quilt I had sewn by hand, the same one Richard and I had slept under for decades. I ran my fingers over the stitching and whispered, "I hope you'd understand, my love." By the time I came downstairs, Melissa was in the kitchen feeding Ella. Her expression was stiff, her eyes avoiding mine. "I'm leaving for a few days," I said quietly. She glanced up briefly. "That's probably best." Her tone was cold, but I saw something flicker behind her eyes, maybe guilt, maybe triumph. I couldn't tell. I bent down to kiss Ella's forehead. The little girl smiled and wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. "Grandma, are you coming back?" she asked innocently. My heart nearly shattered. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Grandma always comes back." Outside, Daniel helped me load my bag into the car. "I'll call you every day," he promised. "Make sure you do," I said softly. As I drove away, I caught sight of Melissa standing at the window, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I would see her in my house for many months. At Aunt Linda's, the welcome was warm, the tea hot, and the conversation gentle. Linda had always been my rock, strong, direct, and wise. When I told her everything, she listened quietly, her brow furrowing deeper with each word. She slapped you? She finally said, disbelief in her tone. And Daniel didn't throw her out immediately? He asked me to leave instead. Linda shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. You've spoiled that boy. He's forgotten who made him the man he is. He's just torn, I said, defending him even now. He loves her. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them disrespect your mother, Linda said sharply. You need to stand up for yourself, Margaret. Don't let them push you out of your own life. I wanted to believe her, but all I felt was exhaustion. That night, I sat by the window of the guest room, watching the moonlight spill across the quiet street. My mind kept replaying everything. Melissa's face twisted in anger, Daniel's uncertain eyes, the sharp sting of that slap. But somewhere beneath the pain, a strange clarity began to form. Maybe this was my chance to see things differently, to stop living just as Daniel's mother and remember who Margaret really was. The thought scared me, but it also stirred something deep inside, a flicker of strength I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know it then, but the days ahead would test that strength in ways I could never have imagined, because leaving my house was just the beginning of a journey I didn't know I needed to take, one that would change everything about how I saw myself, my family, and the meaning of forgiveness. The following week felt like I was living someone else's life. Aunt Linda's house was comfortable and familiar, but it wasn't home. I tried to keep busy, helping her with chores, baking pies like we used to in our younger days, pretending that I didn't glance at my phone every few minutes, waiting for Daniel to call. But the silence from him stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally, on the 5th day, I decided to call him myself. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice tight. Daniel, I began carefully. I haven't heard from you. Is everything all right? There was a pause. We're fine, he said shortly. Melissa's still upset, but things are calming down. Has she apologized? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my tone. Another silence. Longer this time. She's sorry about how things went, he finally said, but she still feels hurt by how you've treated her. I swallowed hard. Daniel, I treated her like family. I gave you both a roof over your heads when you were struggling. If that's mistreatment, then I don't know what kindness is anymore. He sighed heavily. Mom, can we not argue about this again? I just want peace. That word again. Peace. As if I was a storm cloud hovering over their happiness. I wanted to scream, to remind him of the woman who raised him, who worked 2 jobs to send him to university, who stayed up all night sewing costumes for his school plays. But instead, I said quietly, All right, Daniel, if peace is what you want, you'll have it. We hung up, and I sat there staring at my phone, my hands trembling. Aunt Linda, who had been pretending to read the newspaper, looked up. Well? He says they're fine, I muttered, but I'm not welcome yet. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. You're too soft, Margaret. If it were me, I'd have called a lawyer. I let out a bitter laugh. And sue my own son? No, Linda. I won't destroy what little relationship I have left. She shook her head. You always think love means enduring everything, but sometimes love is standing up and saying enough. Her words echoed in my mind long after she left the room. That evening, I walked around her garden, the sun setting in a wash of orange and gold. I thought about Richard again, how he used to tell me, You're too kind for your own good, Maggie. Maybe he had been right. Kindness had become my shield, and now it was the reason I was sitting here displaced and heartbroken. Days turned into weeks, and slowly I began to build a small routine. I helped Linda with her shop, chatted with her neighbors, and joined her at church on Sundays. People were kind, sympathetic even, but every time someone asked, How are things with your son? My chest tightened. I didn't have an answer that didn't hurt. Then, one afternoon, as I was arranging flowers in a vase, Linda called out, Margaret, there's someone at the door for you. My heart leapt for a second. I thought maybe it was Daniel. But when I reached the hallway, it wasn't him. It was Melissa. She stood there in jeans and a white blouse, her hair pulled back, her face unreadable. Melissa, I said slowly, what are you doing here? Can I come in? She asked, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Linda hovered nearby, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, but I nodded. Of course, come in. We sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. She looked around, fidgeting with her hands. This is a lovely place, she said softly. Linda's home is beautiful. I waited, unsure of what to say. After a long silence, she finally spoke. I came to apologize. The words hung in the air between us. I blinked, not trusting that I'd heard her right. Apologize? She nodded. I shouldn't have hit you. It was wrong, and I've hated myself for it every day since. My eyes filled with tears despite myself. Why now? Because Daniel won't stop talking about it, she said quietly. He can't sleep. He keeps saying he let both of us down. I thought if I came here and made things right, maybe we could all move forward. I studied her carefully. There was no arrogance in her face this time. No anger, just exhaustion. But I had learned enough in life to know that apologies didn't erase pain overnight. Melissa, I said finally, I appreciate your apology, but you have to understand something. What happened that day broke something inside me. Not just the trust, but the love I had for you. I need time. She nodded quickly. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I took a slow breath. Why did you do it? Why did you get so angry that day? She looked down, tears welling in her eyes. I was scared, she whispered. I've always felt like I didn't belong in your home. Like no matter what I did, I'd never be enough for Daniel, because you'd always be there. Better, wiser, more loved. Her words stunned me. Melissa, I never meant to make you feel that way. I know, she said through tears, but I felt like I was living in your shadow, and when you told Daniel how to handle our finances that week, I just snapped. I shouldn't have, but I did. Her honesty disarmed me. I sat there quietly, the anger I had been clinging to slowly losing its grip. Melissa, I said softly, you're his wife. You have your own life with him. I only wanted to help because I thought I was doing what mothers do. Maybe I went too far, but everything I did was out of love, not control. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know that now. I see how wrong I was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly in the background. Then she said, Daniel wants you to come home. He's been miserable without you. My heart skipped. He said that? Yes, she said with a faint smile. He misses his mom. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But trust isn't something you rebuild with a single visit. Still, I found myself saying, tell him I'll think about it. Melissa stood and nodded. Thank you. That's all I hoped for. As she walked out the door, Linda emerged from the kitchen, her expression skeptical. Do you believe her? She asked. I looked out the window, watching Melissa's car disappear down the road. I don't know, I said quietly. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe believing isn't about trusting her right now. It's about trusting myself enough to decide what I want next. Linda put her hand on my shoulder. That's my sister, stronger than she knows. I smiled faintly, but that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling once more, a question haunted me. Could forgiveness ever truly heal something that had cracked so deeply? Or was this the beginning of another kind of test, one where I had to learn to forgive without forgetting? I didn't sleep that night either, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't because of pain. It was because of confusion. Melissa's visit had stirred something inside me, something I had buried under layers of hurt and pride. Her words replayed in my head like an old record. I was scared. I felt like I didn't belong. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a truth. And truths have a way of lodging themselves into the heart, whether you want them to or not. By morning, I found myself sitting at the edge of the guest bed, the early light spilling through the curtains, and I knew I needed to see Daniel. Not for him, not for Melissa, but for myself. Aunt Linda was in the kitchen when I told her my plan. You're going back? She asked, setting her teacup down a little too hard. For a visit, I said carefully. Not to move back, not yet. She crossed her arms. I hope you know what you're doing, Margaret. Some wounds need time to heal, and you don't owe anyone your forgiveness until you're ready. I know, I said softly, but I'm tired of sitting here wondering. I need to face them, see it with my own eyes. Linda sighed, shaking her head, but finally handing me her car keys. All right, but if she raises her hand again, I expect you to raise yours. Metaphorically, of course. I smiled faintly. You know I could never do that. That's the problem, she muttered, but she pulled me into a hug anyway. Be careful, Maggie. The drive back to my house felt like walking into a memory. The familiar streets, the old oak tree at the corner, the mailbox that leaned ever so slightly to the left. It all made my heart ache. When I parked in the driveway, I sat there for a full minute before getting out, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me steady. Then I saw Daniel come out onto the porch. The look on his face said everything. Relief, guilt, longing. Mom, he said as he came down the steps. You came. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He pulled me into a hug before I could resist, and for a moment, I just let myself be his mother again. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything, I should have protected you. I felt tears sting my eyes. Daniel, I just needed you to see what that day did to me. It wasn't just the slap, it was losing my son in the same moment. He pulled back, looking at me with remorse written all over his face. You didn't lose me, Mom. I was just too afraid to stand up to her. I thought if I stayed quiet, things would get better. And did they? I asked softly. He shook his head. No, they got worse. She's been trying, though. Going to therapy even. She says she wants to fix things. I wasn't sure what to say to that. Therapy was a good sign, but words and actions had to meet halfway before healing could even begin. Can I come in? I asked finally. Daniel nodded, stepping aside. Of course. Stepping into my home again felt like walking into a version of myself I'd forgotten. Everything was as I'd left it, yet different in subtle ways. The curtains had been changed, the family portraits on the wall rearranged, and my favorite vase now sat in a different corner. Small things, but they spoke loudly of someone trying to make the space her own. Melissa was in the living room, holding little Ella in her lap. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, the child still clinging to her arm. "Grandma!" Ella squealed, wriggling free and running to me. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Oh, my sweet girl," I murmured, my heart softening instantly. When I looked up, Melissa was watching us, her eyes glistening. "Hi, Margaret," she said quietly. "Hello, Melissa?" The air between us was fragile, like a thin glass bridge. Daniel, ever the peacekeeper, said, "Let's all sit down." We did, the three of us, with Ella playing on the carpet between us as though her innocence could anchor the storm. "I just want to start by saying thank you for coming," Melissa said after a long pause. "I know it took a lot for you to walk through that door again." I nodded, but stayed silent. "I meant what I said at Linda's," she continued. "I'm sorry, and I want you to know that I've been working on myself. Talking to someone has helped me realize how much of my anger came from fear. I saw you as a rival when you were just trying to love us." Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw her not as the woman who slapped me, but as a young wife and mother overwhelmed by her own insecurities. "Melissa," I said gently, "forgiveness isn't a door that opens just because someone knocks. It's a slow turn of the handle. I can't pretend nothing happened, but I can choose not to let it poison us forever." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "That's all I could hope for." Daniel reached for my hand. "Maybe we can start fresh, all of us. We can set some boundaries, healthy ones." I smiled faintly. Boundaries sound nice. We spent the afternoon talking, cautiously but honestly. For the first time, Melissa didn't interrupt or get defensive. She listened. And when I spoke, I tried to do the same for her. It wasn't easy. The wounds were still fresh, but there was something healing in the act of trying. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Daniel grilled dinner outside while I helped Melissa set the table. It was awkward, yes, but there was also an unfamiliar peace that filled the air. Not the kind Daniel had begged for weeks ago, the kind born of avoidance, but a quieter, truer peace, built from facing the pain instead of running from it. When I left that evening, Ella hugged me tight. "Grandma, can you come back tomorrow?" she asked, her wide eyes hopeful. I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Maybe, sweetheart, we'll see." Melissa walked me to the door. "Thank you for giving me another chance," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you for asking for one," I replied. Then I stepped into the cool night air, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not complete forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. As I drove back to Linda's, I realized that the real battle hadn't been between me and Melissa at all. It had been between who I was, the mother who couldn't let go, and who I needed to become, a woman who could love without losing herself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I might actually win that battle. The following weeks unfolded with a cautious rhythm, like a dance between two people who were still learning to trust each other again. I visited Daniel and Melissa every few days, never unannounced, never staying too long. The first time I walked into the kitchen and saw Melissa pouring me tea without being asked, I knew something had shifted, even if only slightly. There was still a quiet tension beneath the surface, an unspoken awareness of the slap, the tears, the exile. But there was also an effort I had learned meant hope. Ella was the bridge that held us together. Her laughter filled the silences that might have otherwise turned awkward. Her questions reminded us of what truly mattered. "Grandma, why don't you live here anymore?" she asked one sunny afternoon as we baked cookies together. I paused, the wooden spoon in my hand trembling slightly. Before I could answer, Melissa said gently, "Because Grandma has her own house, sweetheart. But she visits us all the time, don't you, Margaret?" I looked at her, surprised by the warmth in her tone, and smiled. "I do," I said softly, "and I love every visit." After Ella had gone off to play, Melissa stayed behind, helping me clean up the flour that had somehow managed to cover half the kitchen. "I've been thinking," she began hesitantly, "about what you said, about forgiveness being a door that opens slowly. I don't expect you to trust me completely yet, but I want you to know that I've changed. I really have." I studied her face, the earnestness in her eyes. "I can see that," I said quietly. "You're trying, and that's more than I could have hoped for." She nodded, relief washing over her features. "I also wanted to tell you something else. Daniel and I are finally ready to move out. We found a small place across town. Nothing fancy, but it's ours." For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. I had prayed for this day, for them to find their own space. But now that it was here, I felt an ache I hadn't expected. The house had felt too big without them, too quiet. And even though our time together had been filled with conflict, it had also filled a part of my loneliness I hadn't known how to soothe. "That's wonderful," I said finally, forcing a smile. "You both deserve your own home." Melissa reached across the counter, hesitating before touching my hand lightly. "Thank you. For everything, for letting us stay here, for giving me another chance, for not giving up on Daniel or on me." Her touch was tentative but genuine, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. "We all make mistakes, Melissa," I said softly. "The difference lies in what we do after." When they moved out a week later, I stood on the porch watching the moving truck pull away. Ella waved from the back seat, blowing kisses through the window, while Daniel honked twice before turning the corner. The house fell silent once again, but this time it was a peaceful kind of silence, not the heavy, suffocating one that had filled it after the fight. I spent the next few days rearranging things, not because I wanted to erase their presence, but because I wanted to reclaim my space. I brought back my old curtains, polished the furniture, and hung new photos on the wall, ones that included Melissa, too. Healing, I realized, wasn't about pretending the past never happened. It was about acknowledging it and choosing to move forward anyway. One evening, as I was watering the roses in the garden, Daniel stopped by. He looked different, more relaxed, more at ease. "You look happy," I said with a smile. "We are," he replied. "It's not perfect, but it's better. Melissa's still in therapy, and I'm learning how to stand up for myself without making her feel like she's fighting alone." I nodded approvingly. "That's growth, Daniel. That's marriage." He looked down at the flowers and smiled. "You know, Mom, Melissa's been saying she wants to invite you over for dinner soon. She wants to cook for you." I chuckled. "She must be feeling brave." "She's nervous," he admitted, "but she really wants to do it." "Tell her I'll come," I said without hesitation. His eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected me to agree so quickly. "Thank you," he said. "It means a lot to her, and to me." After he left, I sat in the garden until the sky turned orange and pink, thinking about how far we had all come. The slap, the exile, the anger, all of it had brought us here, to this strange, fragile peace. I thought of Richard then, of how he would have been proud to see his son learning to be a better man, and me learning to let go. When the day of the dinner came, I wore my soft blue dress and carried a small bouquet of daisies. Melissa's favorite, I had learned. She greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't feel forced. "Come in, Margaret," she said warmly. "Dinner's almost ready." The house was small but filled with light, with laughter echoing from the kitchen where Daniel was helping Ella set the table. "Grandma," Ella cried, rushing to hug my legs. "Daddy made spaghetti." "Did he now?" I teased. "That's impressive." "Actually, I made it," Melissa said, a playful grin spreading across her face. "Daniel just stirred the sauce." "Hey," Daniel protested, "I grated the cheese." We all laughed, and in that moment I realized something profound. Sometimes family isn't about perfection or constant harmony. It's about weathering the storms, forgiving the failings, and finding new ways to love each other, despite the scars. After dinner, as we sat together sharing stories and laughter, Melissa turned to me with a serious expression. "Margaret," she said softly, "I need to say it again. Thank you for not giving up on me." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "We all fall down, dear. What matters is how we stand up again." That night, driving home under the silver glow of the moon, I felt lighter than I had in years. The house that once echoed with anger now held warmth again, even if from a distance. My heart was at peace, and I knew that I had done something right, not by fighting or punishing, but by forgiving. Yet deep down, I sensed there was still one more chapter to this story. One last lesson life had yet to teach me, because healing, I was learning. wasn't just about others, it was about finally forgiving yourself too. The day I realized I had forgiven myself came quietly, like a sunrise you don't notice until it fills the room with light. It had been 3 months since the dinner at Daniel and Melissa's new house. Our relationship had settled into a gentle rhythm, regular visits, Sunday calls, small family gatherings that no longer felt tense or forced. Melissa and I had even started exchanging recipes over text, an ordinary act that felt extraordinary given how far we'd come. One morning, I woke up early, made myself tea, and sat by the window watching the world come alive outside. The roses I'd planted last spring were blooming in full color, defying the frost that had almost killed them that winter. I smiled to myself, realizing how much they reminded me of my own journey, cut down, frozen, yet still finding the strength to bloom again. I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in months. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. When I returned home, I noticed an envelope slipped under my front door. My name was written in careful cursive, Melissa's handwriting. I sat down on the couch, my heart beating a little faster as I opened it. Inside was a letter, simple and sincere. Dear Margaret, I've been thinking about everything we went through, and I realized something important. You didn't just forgive me. You taught me what real strength looks like. I used to think being strong meant winning arguments, proving I was right or standing my ground. But watching you handle everything with grace showed me that true strength is kindness, even when it's undeserved. I can never undo what I did that day, but I hope I can spend the rest of my life proving that I've changed. You've given me the chance to be a better woman, a better wife, and a better mother. For that, I'll always be grateful. Love, Melissa. Tears blurred the ink as I read her words. For the first time since that slap, the last thread of bitterness in my heart finally loosened and fell away. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "Thank you, not just to Melissa, but to life itself, for the pain that had shaped me, for the lessons that had come wrapped in heartbreak." Later that week, I was invited to Ella's school recital. It was a small event, but it felt monumental to me. When Ella spotted me in the audience, her little face lit up with pure joy. "That's my grandma!" she shouted, earning a few chuckles from the parents around us. Melissa sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine, a gesture that spoke volumes. Daniel leaned forward from his seat, smiling, and for that brief moment I felt the completeness of something I hadn't even realized was missing. Peace, family, and love, all in their truest forms. After the recital, we all went out for ice cream. Ella, with her cone dripping faster than she could eat it, looked up at me and said, "Grandma, do you know what Daddy says about you?" I laughed. "No, what does he say?" She grinned proudly. "He says you're the strongest person in the world." My throat tightened, and I looked at Daniel, who just smiled and shrugged. "She's not wrong," he said softly. That night, as I returned home, I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs that told the story of my life. I paused by the mirror in the hallway, the same one I'd avoided for months because I didn't want to see the sadness in my own eyes. But now, as I looked at my reflection, I saw something different. I saw a woman who had been broken and rebuilt. I saw wrinkles carved by laughter and tears, eyes that had once been weary now filled with quiet confidence. I saw Margaret, not just Daniel's mother, not just Richard's widow, but me. I sat down at my writing desk, the one that had gathered dust for far too long, and began to write. Not about pain, not about regret, but about the resilience of the heart, about how sometimes it takes losing everything to find yourself again. The story poured out of me, raw and real. And when I finished the first page, I felt lighter than I had in years. The next day, I invited Melissa and Daniel over for dinner at my house. It felt fitting, a full circle. Melissa arrived with flowers, white lilies this time, a symbol of renewal. Daniel brought a bottle of wine, and Ella brought her radiant laughter. We ate together, shared stories, and when the night came to an end, Melissa hugged me before leaving. "You've become my second mother," she whispered. I smiled and said, "No, dear. I've always been your mother-in-law, but now maybe I'm also your friend." When the house grew quiet again, I went out to the garden and sat under the stars. The air was cool, the night calm. I thought of all the women like me, mothers, widows, grandmothers, who had given so much of themselves that they had forgotten who they were. And I wished I could tell each of them what I had learned, that loving others doesn't mean erasing yourself, and that forgiveness, no matter how late it comes, is never wasted. Life had come full circle. Melissa and I had found peace. Daniel had found his strength, and I had found myself again. I looked up at the night sky and whispered softly, "Richard, I hope you're proud of us." Somewhere in the stillness, I could almost hear his gentle voice saying, "Always Maggie, always." And you, reading this, what would you do if life pushed you to the edge, if someone you loved hurt you so deeply you thought forgiveness was impossible? Would you find the strength to heal, to start again, to love despite the scars? Because believe me, it's never too late to begin again, and it's never too late to choose peace over pain. I post videos like this every week, so if you enjoyed this one, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And you'll be part of the first 100 supporters helping this channel grow.